Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, and welcome to the Foundry Skill Up, an artist's guide to Blinkscript. My name is Elise, and I am part of Foundry's industry marketing team, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you our special guest speaker, Chris Fryer, and our moderator, Anna Samuel. I'll let the two of them introduce themselves quickly. Chris, if you want to go ahead.
Awesome. Hi everyone. My name is Chris Fryer. I'm a digital compositor based in the UK, but thanks to the wonders of remote working, I've been lucky enough to experience some international stuff. I have had a bunch of fun escapades in like VFX for film, a little bit of TV stuff. I've recently spent a lot of time working on feature animation, and most importantly, my most recent endeavor was an artist's guide to Blinkscript. Hi everyone, it's awesome to see everyone in the chat. Awesome.
Cool. Hi everyone, I'm Anna. I'm an associate product manager at Foundry, and I am working on a team which focuses on artist-facing tools and UX and UI improvements for Nuke. I was a compositor before I did this job, so yeah, that helps.
Awesome. Thank you for introducing yourselves, and thank you to everybody for joining. Just some quick housekeeping before I move on. The recording today, or the session today, will be recorded, and a link will be sent directly to you. Also, if you have any questions for Anna or for Chris, please feel free to add them into the questions tab on the right-hand side. And if you see any question that you like, upvote it, and we'll be sure to prioritize that. Today is part of a greater virtual event series. We started this journey in March of 2020, and we've continued on with over 80 webinars so far. We're looking forward to joining FMX in the beginning of May with MPC Episodic as well as Jellyfish, and they'll be presenting the third day, MPC will, and then How to Train Your Dragon Homecoming will be presented by Jellyfish. Also in May, we are looking forward to joining forces with RenderMan to talk about their work on Soul with Mari and Katana. If you're interested in any of our virtual events, please check out our website. Also, if you have any feedback, please reach out to us at virtual.events@foundry.com. I'd also like to take this opportunity to mention Foundry Learn. On our Learn page, you can find many great tutorials, release notes, developer docs, and more. Here you can see a few examples of the tutorials that we have available. And we recently released part 1 of the Color Management Fundamentals and ACES workflow training in Nuke that was created by Victor Perez in partnership with Netflix. So if you're interested in checking that out, it's available on our Learn page, and we'll share the link in the chat. Also, while you're on Foundry's website, I'd like to encourage you to check out our Insights Hub. There you can find great articles and case studies on industry trends. Here, again, you can see a couple examples. We have an artist spotlight. We have highlights from our virtual event series, Foundry Live, which we did at the end of March, series on our new machine learning tools, and much more. And also, if you're on social media, check us out either at Foundry Team or at the Foundry Team. Give us a follow and stay connected with the latest Foundry updates. Also, I'd like to say thank you to everybody who has supported our virtual event series this year, especially Chris today. We are very thankful for your continued support, and we couldn't do this without you. And we look forward to having many more of you join us here on stage. And finally, Chris has been generous enough to give away 3 of the Artist Blinkscript guides to 3 lucky attendees. I'm going to launch a poll here in a minute, so if you're interested in receiving the guide, please say yes to the poll. And also for those who don't win, we're still offering a 15% discount, and that will be available until the end of the month. All you need to do is enter the discount code Foundry. And so with that, I'm going to pass it on to Chris's presentation. He pre-recorded this for streaming quality purposes, but we will be available in the chat, and we'll be back for the live Q&A at the end. So I'll roll the video now and hope everybody enjoys.
Okay, hello and welcome to this webinar about an artist's guide to Blinkscript. I am unbelievably excited to talk about Blinkscript in general because it's awesome, but also to discuss the guide itself, but also clear up and sort of clarify what Blinkscript is, and specifically what Blinkscript is when you're approaching it as an artist, as I think if you're coming from perhaps a pipeline or TD perspective, your relationship with Blinkscript will probably be very different. And as an artist myself, who has also done some lead work, I believe that Blinkscript is an unbelievably valuable tool for solving problems that can't necessarily be solved in Nuke native nodes, and working with a very easy to iterate and very easy to change tool. So let's get into it. So when I was first getting into Blinkscript, I found one of the most challenging things to overcome was where to begin. And there are a lot of great resources out there, and the more I've learned about Blinkscript, the more I can appreciate those resources. But when effectively starting at step 1, it's very difficult to know where to come from. And also, I found that I didn't even know what I needed to know in order to get started. And so my personal experience was finding a lot of great resources from some other people just to get my footing. And then I just experimented on my own. And those of you who follow my blog will know that I try to experiment with tools wherever possible and think, hey, how would I do this? Make it as a Blinkscript experiment and then share it so other people can follow along. And so as an artist, how would I describe Blinkscript? I'd say Blinkscript is all about writing code to make pixels, which sounds like a very broad description, but I think that's exactly the point. So I think if you can figure out a way to write in Blinkscript the effect you want to achieve, there's not an awful lot that's off limits. This is effectively an expression language that works on pixels, so there are obviously some things that you can't do. Like, for example, you're not going to go creating geometry with the Blinkscript node because that's not its purpose. If you've seen Terminator 2, the expression node is kind of like Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator, where he's a big old robot, and then Blinkscript is kind of like the liquid metal Terminator that can kind of adapt to any problem. And so because of the nature of Blinkscript, it allows you to iterate very quickly because it's got a very responsive interface. It allows you to expand beyond Nuke native operations, and it allows you to come up with some creative solutions without being dragged down with technical restrictions. Because I understand the phrase iterate quickly is quite a nebulous description, and you're kind of wondering what exactly does that mean. I've got an example here of 2 tools, one made with Nuke native nodes and one made with Blinkscript, that one is enormously faster than the other because of a few additional features. So I'll quickly just discuss what the tool does, and I can talk about the features as to why. So a while back, I made a node called Spectralize, which would take in 2 StMaps as a sort of transform information, and then when you look at it, it does some really gnarly chromatic aberration. So if I just set this to be a very, very minor change, you can kind of see what I'm on about. But as I turn up the divisions on this, it gets slower and slower and slower. And so what's happening on the inside is those divisions are driving a time blur. And so time blur is a really great way to iterate over something multiple times, which Blinkscript also allows you to do because it allows you to do something called a for loop and loop over those pixels. And so if I look at the exact same result in this version, you'll see it's very, very fast, except this did 120 iterations faster than it took this to do 24. So if I do 24 here and we look at like a one-to-one comparison, I can use this at almost real time because this tool is GPU enabled, and GPUs are very, very good at running operations on a screen scale. Whereas if I look at this and I wait for that same effect to happen, it's unbelievably slow. And so what you can do is you can make very artist-friendly rapid response tools to work with, and then when you send it to farm, the CPUs there, which are more powerful, can churn through that at a much faster rate. Something else Blinkscript can allow you to do is to interact with your image in ways that are otherwise impossible using Nuke native nodes. And in order to do that, I'm going to show you a quick demonstration of a position projector. And so what I've done is I have grabbed just this quick scanline render that I've pre-comped out of some scenes in a 3D space, and the camera is moving around these stationary objects. And those of you who are unfamiliar with the position projector, you're about to have your mind blown because this is an amazing technique that I use all the time. The way a position projector operates is that you can grab the position data of your scene like this, and you can then manipulate that in such a way that you generate an StMap that you can project your image on. And so I've got frame 50 as my reference frame here. What I can do is I can draw on my shapes like this, and then when I generate this StMap, I can apply this on here like this. And so you'll see as this moves now, this sticks, which is great. But one of the issues with this technique that I always had was that you don't get decent motion blur when you do something like this, because it just does a single sample when it projects onto the object. And so when I set about sort of solving this problem, what I was able to do was I was able to, in a almost a hack, to be honest, transform these pixels as if they were in 3D space. And so I've got this position projection version here, which I'm going to set my motion blur to, for now I'm going to leave it on 1 step with a shutter of 0.5, and I'm going to set this to be the motion blur mode. And now when I put this on, I'm going to put this up to 100 to get rid of that stuff. As you see the camera moving now, we've got this sort of accurate motion blur, and the way that this is working is it's actually doing a sort of pseudo transformation in 3D space with something that's covered in an Artist Guide to Blinkscript that I sort of refer to as inverse transformations, where instead of moving an image to the location of your StMap, you feed your Blinkscript the StMap and tell it to then write from those locations. And it sounds really, really abstract, and there's a reason it's the last chapter in the guide, if my memory serves me. But yeah, it leads to some really, really abstract concepts. Like, for example, instead of projecting a texture onto an image, I could actually manipulate the image and move it in 3D space. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug this image in to its own projection. And that sounds a little bit backwards, but what I'm able to do using a transformation matrix set up here, using an axis and some kind of manipulation linked up to the transform data, and during the guide you do build your own transformation matrix Blinkscript, is I'm able to actually sort of rotate this object in 3D space. And now this isn't, I'm not touching the 3D scene here at all. The only thing I'm using is the camera. This is just an image, and I'm able to move almost these pixels in 3D space. And I've used this before to set up a procedural reflection setup. I wanted to enhance the reflections on a ground. It was kind of a wet surface, imagine that. And what I would do is I would take everything above the scene and I would then start to scale it negatively. And what I would get would be these very, very cool, very, very funky looking reflections. And so the way this is generating motion blur is that it moves the image ever so slightly one way, moves it ever so slightly another, does loads of loops of that, and then averages it. And then we look at our texture that we're adding over the top. It has that motion blur. So I could do 100 steps, and thanks to the magic of GPUs, it's able to do that without much issue. Use the correct shutter time. And then you can see this is sticking on the surface with the correct motion blur. Which is really, really promising when you look at them as a comparison. Something else that's really interesting about Blinkscript that is unavailable in Nuke native setups is that when you project using Blinkscript, you use a function called a bilinear function, and it's a sort of filtering algorithm. And so when you transform something in Nuke, you might use cubic or Langsdorff 6 or whatever. And what this is doing is it's doing a slight sharpening when you transform your image. But a bilinear function is like a truly linear interpolation. And so when I look at this here, I get the results I would expect. And I've tested this with other non-blink based position projectors, and they have a similar result where when you project something like this, you get this kind of bleeding on the edges where all of the different filtering sort of misbehaves slightly. And so what this all kind of accumulates in is the ability to kind of make things that with Nuke native nodes you wouldn't have even considered. A tool I made a while ago and recently updated called God Ray's Projector allows you to basically create these sort of God Ray volume projections that appear 3D, and they interact exactly the way a 3D scene would, where you can sort of move around with your camera, all within Blinkscript. And when you see the Blinkscript interface, and I'm going to just quickly go back to this demo, it's just a space where you can put text in. That's all it is. And you can come up with tools which are as clever, if not cleverer, than you, the artist, making them. And it's an unbelievably rewarding experience, genuinely. And one final tool I'd like to just quickly talk about that really hammers home the kind of thing you can do with Blinkscript that you can't do with Nuke native stuff is a tool I made recently called Surface Blur. And Surface Blur does something very simple. In concept, in theory, it allows you to blur an object with the convolution, the blurring, being perpendicular to the surface of the object. And so this is my object here with lots of nice contrast on to blur. And what Surface Blur lets me do is blur parallel to the surface. So something that's facing the camera is a nice circle, whereas something that's at an angle to the camera is sort of slanted like this. And you could do a chunk of this somewhat easily with Nuke native nodes. You just sort of create a disk and then do a convolve. But then when you think if there are this many surfaces, you'd have to crop it into regions, you'd have slicing and masking. Whereas with a Blinkscript, you can do that nice and easily. And so just to sort of show how that operates, what I've done is I've got my normals from this object, and I am then manipulating them so that they point the camera. I'm then plugging that into this node, and what this is doing, I'll bring this down to save your eyes, is this is creating some data that we are then able to do transformations inside Blinkscript with, all just doing some color math, all just using a transformation matrix, which is covered in the guide, in order to do some really cool stuff. And so what I've done here is I've got a quick sort of kernel to convolve with here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to color grab on this surface to kind of show how the theory behind the tool works. And so what happens is if I were to grab this surface here, you can see it's at the angle you'd expect. It's got that kind of tilt, or if I move it more central, it faces the camera. And so the way this Blinkscript works is that it is doing a convolve for every single pixel of the image, and it's angling the filter based on the surface of the material. And this is the kind of thing where once you kind of get your teeth sunk into an idea, you can really begin to follow it up and expand on it. And I personally found myself going down alleys I didn't expect to go down. Things like matrices, or how normals really, really work, or some color math stuff. And that is where I think an Artist Guide to Blinkscript was my main goal, was that I wanted to just say, hey, if you're starting from zero, you can start here, and by the end of the guide, you're going to be making Blinkscripts of your own, and you're going to have a really fantastic starting point, and you're going to be really competent at making tools that you're interested in. If any of the tools that you've seen here you think are interesting and you'd like to know how they work, and specifically you'd like to actually dive into the Blinkscripts and how they work, if you go to chrisferrara.co.uk/blog, everything that is here I have talked about in a video similar to this in much more detail. There are download links for all the tools. All of the code is open, so you can go and look at it. Some of the more recent ones I've commented as well, a lot more than previous tools, and I think those will also be some really useful resources for you to go and see, and maybe change a couple lines and see what changes, or delete something and see if it breaks, or copy and paste something into a tool that you're making. I think that will also be really valid and really helpful. And so without further ado, let's get into the contents of the guide. So I'm really excited to be able to talk about the guide again now that the guide's been out in the wild for a little bit, because I've seen a lot of people finding the guide useful in ways that I hadn't anticipated, which is really amazing to see. And I've also able to address some of the questions people have asked me straight from the beginning, all over again. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. So the contents of the guide is 4 hours of code-along style tutorial videos, each less than 25 minutes long, that will cover a concept from start to end. And for any of the chapters that have got sort of code-along elements to them, which is pretty much all of them, there's also the Blinkscript node itself that I wrote during the demo that you also have available to go through and play with yourself and build on and play around with. On top of that, there is also a couple of extra bits at the end, which is a few code snippets, which are super useful. And I actually go back and grab my own code snippets from this all the time. It's stuff like a transformation matrix template and a few other things which are particularly useful. On top of that, I also just have a very, very brief video just sort of discussing how I go about making a tool that I think people might find helpful. But I don't really include that as part of the contents of the guide. That's not included in the runtime or anything like that, but still really valid. So Before I get on to the rest of the contents, I'm super keen to just sort of discuss the ethos that I had when I started making it. So the first thing was, I think a lot of people really benefit from learning by doing, and I think our industry in general sort of throws you in at the deep end and lets you learn by doing. You know, you get given a task that you've never done before, or a particularly challenging keying shot, for example, and you learn on the job. And so this is all about making stuff yourself and learning in that way. The next thing I was really keen for was for each chapter to be a sort of concentrated burst that covers everything from start to finish. As I said before, each chapter is no longer than 25 minutes, and I was really keen on this because I myself have watched an enormous quantity of tutorials, and sometimes I found myself going back to tutorials, and when they reach a certain point, when you get these like monster 40-minute plus videos, if they're not broken down into chapters, sometimes you can find yourself trying to find a specific bit and you're having to go through a timeline. And so I was really keen that everything was very concentrated and also just very easy to find. And I myself have actually referred back to some of the videos in this guide when I've been trying to remind myself of certain bits and pieces for a new tool. And although hearing my voice back is something a little bit alien, they genuinely have been super useful for me when making things. I think the most recent example of this was one of the blurring chapters I referred back to in order to remind myself how to make the surface blur tool. And then the final sort of part of the ethos is that mistakes happen. When I made each chapter of the guide, I actually had on one side of my screen the code already done from when I sort of did my preparation. And even then, I still, when I got into the flow of it and I'm talking, make really simple mistakes, or I do some syntax wrong, or I spell something wrong. And for the most part, I've left the problem-solving element of that in so that you can see me figure out how to solve something, so you, when you're figuring stuff yourself, have a familiar point to go from. It's not a huge feature of the guide. It comes up a few times just naturally, but I still thought it was a relevant point as part of the ethos. So the first chapter is just an initial overview of the Blinkscript node's interface. Basically, we drop a Blinkscript node in as it comes in default in Nuke as a saturation kernel, and we just go through each tab individually, talking through what each box does, what most buttons do, and how the Blinkscript node works, so that we're familiar, and so there are no gotchas later down the line where you get whiplash from a tab that we're unfamiliar with. So after that, we go on to creating a blank Blinkscript node. The Blinkscript node, by default, when you load it into Nuke, it comes in as a saturation kernel. It's a really useful thing to have as an example of a functional tool, but when we're going to be making multiple Blink scripts every so often, we want to be able to start from scratch. And this blank Blink script that we make is actually something that I'm amazed I didn't do before. I made it for the guide, and since having made the guide, I use this all the time. Every tool I make from now onwards so far has been using the blank Blink script that was made for this demo as its example. After that, we go on to variable types. Those of you familiar with other scripting languages, such as Python or C++, which is what Blinkscript has the most in common with, use variables to carry information. And so Blinkscript's got lots of familiar variable types that you can use, and a couple that are kind of niche to it that are also worth discussing, and that's what this quick 6-minute chapter covers. So the next chapter, we create a constant. Creating a constant is a really natural starting point where all you're basically doing is for every pixel of the image, you're just assigning a value to it in the same way the constant node works. This is a really useful chapter just to sort of talk about how to actually write an image from scratch, just using lines of code. And yeah, it's a very natural sort of springboard to start from. Going from that, we talk about creating a grade node. This is a really useful way of discussing how to read an image in, how to manipulate that image, and put a new image out. This also doubles up as a really fantastic way to just sort about all the color processes that you basically are going to need to make 99% of color tools. Those of you that use a grade node, which I think we all do pretty much every day, will know that those fundamental image processes can then be built on to create more complex effects. And each chapter after this that works with color builds off this same concept. Next up, we create a monochrome node using Blinkscript. This is really useful because for those unfamiliar, a monochrome node or a monochrome operation combines multiple channels to create a single channel. This is a really nice stepping stone into the concept of combining multiple channels and mix and matching them in a Blinkscript node in order to create an output that is using your red, green, blue, and alpha channel to create something completely different. Next up, chapter 7, we talk about transforming the image. This is where we start to get onto some of the more niche things about Blinkscript, but also some of the most powerful stuff about Blinkscript. Blurs and StMaps and all things like that are built off this concept. Even just a simple transformation of moving an image left and right in Blinkscript comes with a couple of steps that you have to do in advance. And so this also handles how to read in an image in Blinkscript's own way. Blinkscript likes you to, in advance, tell it how you'd like to be able to read your image, whether you're doing a one-dimensional transform, a two-dimensional transform like up, down, left, right, or whether you're doing something crazy like an StMap operation where you need to call any pixel at any time. And that, even saying it out loud, sounds really abstract, which is why it's really nice to just work on each step one after another. Next up, we talk about creating an StMap node. This covers the fundamental concept of taking in an image in order to drive a transformation. So if you think about when you plug some noise into an IDA store in order to ripple an image, this is the same concept where you're effectively using vectors or using any sort of data you want in order to drive transformation effects. Next up, we talk about replicating a God rays effect. This takes the transformation and StMap content that we've done previously and then introduces the concept of looping over your image multiple times. And I think this is where Blinkscript really starts to come into its own, where being able to run multiple operations as many times as your processor can handle sometimes can become unbelievably powerful. And a God rays effect is a perfect example of this. Next up is the BuildABlow workshop. This chapter's name was actually the thing that finally convinced me to make the guide. It just seemed like too much fun to not use. And so in this chapter, we cover making a true radial blur where the fall off is completely linear. This gets on some really great stuff about filtering the image, looping within loops, which again can sound really complicated, plugging in multiple things, and at 21 minutes is one of the longest videos in the guide, and with good reason. Next up, we go on to creating a Blink Gizmo. This is all about turning your Blinkscript node into a fully finished artist-facing Gizmo, where some people who aren't enlightened, like hopefully you will be soon to Blinkscript, don't want to see the code and get scared by it. They just want to see a gizmo that they can use nice and easily. We also talk about turning that gizmo into a true exponential blur, and also how to do some tips and tricks with a combination of Blinkscript and Nuke native nodes in order to make it more efficient and make some shortcuts to make it run nice and smoothly for our teams. Next up, we talk about creating a Convolve. This builds on the concepts of the BuildABlow workshop, where now we are using an image to drive that blur. Think about the surface blur tool I showed earlier. This is a much more simple version of that same concept. This is really great for thinking about, taking in images to blur images. But then on top of that, we also talk about changing your blur size based on an additional image that we plug in to create a sort of very simple proof of concept ZD focus effect. After that, we talk about creating a color matrix. In the demo I showed earlier, where we were sort of pseudo rotating our scene when we were just moving the pixels with some clever math that Blinkscript will do for us once we've told it what to do, we're able to manipulate 3D position data in very clever ways. And once you kind of understand how a transformation matrix works, which gets covered in the chapter, more powerful operations then become available, and the next few things build on that. In chapter 14, we build a position projector of our own, where we plug in some position data and we plug in a camera, and we're able to then project an image on that scene. This comes with just a really simple starting 3D scene for you to plug into. It's not a rendered 3D scene, it's something we built entirely in Nuke, just with some nodes, so you can tweak it to your heart's content. And then you can follow along with that in order to project images onto that data. And then finally, the last chapter is inverse transformations. This is where I think Blinkscript really starts to shine, where instead of taking an StMap and writing to those pixels, we instead plug in effectively coordinate data that we want to write to, and we kind of flip the whole operation on its head. And as you go through the steps of the guide, that will begin to make more and more sense. But this is where you can begin to do some really interesting stuff, like some fake 3D effects. And I think there's some really amazing Blinkscript-based tools out there that build on top of this as well. And so I'm going to go over some potential questions now in advance. And then afterward, if there are any additional questions, I think there's a Q&A after this. So first things first, who is the guide aimed at? Now, this is the question that I think surprised me the most in a really amazing way, actually. So when I initially put the guide together, I expected this guide to really be aimed at the sort of super senior artists who are reaching a ceiling with the skills they have available to them now and are looking for that new door to open, so there's this whole new volume that they can expand into. What I've actually found is that there doesn't seem to be too much of a skill starting point for people to get involved with Blinkscript. When I put the guide together, there was a 75% student discount, which is still completely valid, and that meant that actually quite a few students, quite a lot of students actually, have been getting involved with the guide, and that's been a really rewarding process to see people messaging me and building tools together, and I've seen on LinkedIn some cool stuff coming out of students as well. And so, yeah, I think the guide is probably aimed at anybody who's just interested in pushing themselves as far as they can go, especially if you're already familiar with quite a lot of complicated principles. So the next question is, do you need to know C++ or Python before starting? I would recommend having a familiarity with some sort of programming, such as Python, for example, or C++, but I don't think it's completely necessary. Blinkscript is fairly unique to itself, and so I explain pretty much everything from the ground up. It may be a really useful tool to show you kind of areas that you do need to prop yourself up on and go and do some background research and then reapproach now that you know what you need to know. So my personal experience before jumping into Blinkscript was that I had a fairly solid knowledge of Python for Nuke and no C++ experience whatsoever, and I managed to survive, so I'm sure you can too. So when you download the guide, what do you receive? You receive the full just over 4 hours of videos as files that you can have. You can keep them for whenever you need. You also get all the Nuke scripts for most of the chapters. And then you will also get private links for you to access if you're on the go or if you don't want to download the full file size, which I think is about 1.5 GB. Or, you know, if you decide to sit on a bus and learn Blinkscript in your spare time, that is absolutely possible. And I know a lot of people are actually opting for that option. So can you use these examples in production? Yes, you absolutely can. Everything was made with a commercial license of Nuke, so you won't run into any licensing issues when you go to port these onto work machines. That being said, all of the demos are sort of proof of concepts to explain and for learning, and so they're not polished and they're not designed for a workplace environment. But what I would recommend is either building your own tools from scratch with the skills that you've learned during the guide, or to use the examples as a foundation that you can then build on to support your teams and also create some really radical tools. Is there a student discount? There absolutely is. Check my site for the absolute specifics, but if you've been a student in the last 12 months, all you have to do is contact me proving that, and you will get 75% off the full price. And with that, thank you so much for your generosity with your time. I'm really interested in hearing any further questions you might have, and also just generally chatting about nodes, because it's one of my favorite things to do. Happy comping. Over to non-recorded Chris.
Hello. I think it might just be me in here at the moment.
Hello, no, I'm here as well.
Ooh, so I think we're just going to do a short Q&A. So
Fantastic.
I'm just going to sort these.
There are a couple cool ones.
Yes. So we've got one from Jefferson, and I'm going to try this starting the live answer. So.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay, so if you could name a language similar enough to Blinkscript that could be interesting to learn and find resources, also contributing to Blinkscript's learning.
Yeah, that's a top tier question actually. So C++ has got the most in common with Blinkscript. They're borderline identical for most things. There are a few things where you have to sort of change the syntax that you use, or one expression might be named something different. But yeah, when sort of putting together a Blink tool, I find myself all the time basically typing in like averaging multiple values C++, and then I will go and grab a good substitute there. So I'd say yeah, C++ is probably the closest thing. But yeah, as I mentioned before, I don't believe that C++ is a requirement, as I think most people who have approached the guide are like Python only, or have a similar knowledge of something technical. And that touches on as well a really good question that was sort of asked me before this that I think is really useful, which is like, what is a good resource to sort of prop your knowledge up before approaching it, or is like an assistant thing? And I suppose answering that from personal experience was that my way of getting into the technical side of things was that I did the Code Academy Python course, and that's what got me started on with Python. And also the Foundry resources are super solid. So there's a Foundry Blinkscript resource to look at, and also lots of Python assistance with that as well.
Cool, thank you. Right.
With regards to the discount as well, yeah, if you do get a copy of the course and you happen to also be a winner, it's super easy for me to like refund your purchase. So don't worry about anything like that. You're not going to end up angrily deleting an email with a discount code in it or anything like that.
Cool. We have another good question from Austin. Where do you write your Blinkscript code? I find it so hard to read in the node itself and no auto-completion or anything.
Yeah, that's another really good one. So in the introduction to the guide, I actually talk about how I sort of recommend using something like Sublime as a text editor that's super friendly. And so at the start of the guide, I sort of bring Sublime in, sort of briefly explain why I think it's really useful. And then the whole of the guide, just to keep it constant for everyone, I'm very brave and I write the whole thing in the Blinkscript node editor so that everyone's sort of seeing it from the same page and can follow along with no extra stuff.
Nice. Find another use. Oh,
sounds good.
Sebastian says, where have you found
How's it going, man?
Blinkscript the most useful within an industry pipeline?
That's a really good one. I think it's really, really useful for like, I think the best way to kind of think about it is like, if you imagine like a Gizmo built from nodes as like assembling your Lego bricks, Blinkscript, you can kind of like smelt your own bricks into whatever shape you kind of need. And so like the demo that I show with the surface blur that uses like a blurring setup that can be sort of blur parallel to the surface, that's something that I didn't find a way to replicate that using Nuke native nodes. And so I think, yeah, the first useful thing about Blinkscript is probably that it genuinely does open like a whole extra dimension of what's possible for you. Additionally, I think it is genuinely quite fast, and there's sort of like if you can make a tool in Blinkscript that could only be done using Blinkscript, you're kind of pushing your team in a way that's a lot better. I kind of jokingly say, if you think it, you can blink it, which I know is really cringe, but it's also I found to be a good attitude to have towards stuff like that.
Cool, thank you. Emily's got quite a good one. How often do you find yourself using Blinkscript / your tools during your work as a compositor?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think and this is also as a purely selfish reason why I'm trying to spread Blinkscript so much, is that there are loads of tools that are built on Blinkscript that you might not even know. At work a lot at the moment, I use a lot of tools from the excellent Adrian Poyo, and a lot of those have got like Blinkscript cores to them. And so even if I'm not like writing a script myself, which I generally consider that as more of a project to put together a Blinkscript tool rather than just like putting together a template, I think there's a lot of tools out there that people use quite a lot that are built on Blinkscript. Which, yeah, I think are super useful. So, I mean, I use them like dozens of times a day, some of them.
All right, nice. Let's have a look. Jonathan says, have you seen any stability issues with Blinkscript? If so, how have you resolved them?
Yeah, so Blinkscript crashes a lot, but it's not necessarily Blinkscript's fault. I think it's my human brain disagreeing with the mechanical brain of the computer, because it allows you to do stuff where, like, if you're not careful, like when I was putting my Blinkscript, when I was putting my position projector tool together, there were lots of issues that I was coming across where I was like writing outside the bounds of the image, and if you're not careful about the way you handle that, you can cause a crash. Similarly, stuff like my GodRays projector tool, I write out, when I was putting that together, I'd write outside bounds all the time. But that's something I found really useful, is that approaching, like, I don't pretend to be like the most technical compa in the world. And I think that's kind of my point, is that Blinkscript is a really good bridge for creative people to do technical things. And so I have learned a lot about technical things that I would never have approached if I wasn't just experimenting, like the Godrays projector tool, or anything that's using the like inverse transformations. I'm like trawling through resources on like transform matrices and how they actually function, because with Blinkscript you're literally building stuff from the ground up.
All right.
What's my favorite node? Hi, Adele.
Yes, I like that one. Let's bring that one on.
That's a very, very big question. From a utility standpoint, the grade node is great, but I don't think anything adds spice to a comp as quickly as the Godrays node does. And I think any comp that's got Godrays in it is immediately a better image. So that's an obvious answer.
Nice. I am not sure how to pronounce your name, Loic.
So Loic's actually one of the guys that I was talking about earlier, who I think is still a student, put together a really awesome Udemy tool that on LinkedIn, and we had a back and forth about that. So that's really cool. Anyway, what's the question? Yeah, there more resources somewhere. Yeah, so with regards to that, part of the reason I made the guide is because I think Blinkscript is one of those, like, for how like useful and how powerful it is, I think it's like criminally unwidespread, which is why I'm so keen to just get people into it. I think, but the Foundry resources are super useful, but I've also found that the community at large, 99.9% of the time, are kind enough to leave their Blinkscript nodes fully unlocked for you to trawl through them and sort of reverse engineer everything. And I know for me, that was a lot of how I learned.
Right. I'm not sure I understand this question, but you may. Have you had any experience?
I personally haven't delved into that chaos, but I think I have seen, I believe that's a reference to Mads Hagbar, cool video about some flooding stuff. So I do recommend people go check it out, but I personally have not dabbled with that. Yeah.
Right.
So you can have debug scripts tool.
Do you want to grab one from?
Yeah. I think Jonas is just, yeah. So I can't answer too much about that one. But when you are putting together your Blinkscripts, the Blinkscript node does have like a fairly rudimentary error logging system that does sort of at least tell you the line where the problems are. And I think it's something that it's functional. It allows you to definitely make tools. But I think also, yeah, it's all sorts, which is why I think stuff like Sublime as well, though, is very useful for having that sort of, just having an enormous resource of stuff to just keep you on track and make sure you're doing syntax correctly and stuff like that.
Cool. Pete from Foundry says,
awesome.
have you dabbled with
I have dabbled with it ever so slightly. I think it's, from my very brief experiments, I think it's pretty cool. I think my only experiments with it so far is that I took, I was trying to make like a gravity thing where you just chuck a load of particles in and you try and get like some orbiting going on. And yeah, I think it's really cool. I think it's going to be insane once people start building tools through. And it is on my roadmap of things to start investigating because it's super exciting to see.
Nice. The next course. Have you created any dynamic blink nodes with variable inputs?
I'd say, I guess probably not. Everything that I've done so far just tends to handle a very consistent scenario. I haven't delved too far into the wilderness with regards to things like that. So no, I'd probably say I haven't.
Okay. I'm going to scroll.
Unless I've misunderstood the question, and that's actually something really simple, but yeah.
Yeah, please ask the question again if we haven't done that one correctly. Christoph says, is the Blinkscript editor Does it show clearly where there's a mistake? Like
no, I'd say like while you're typing, I'd say actually it probably doesn't. Whereas Sublime does have a lot more support for things like that, where it will like underline something or recommend you a semicolon. I'd say that like when you click go on a Blinkscript node, that's where you start to see the problems. And provided you still have a Nuke window open by the time it's finished trying to figure things out, you can go from there. But I don't know, maybe not. But that might be more of a Foundry-centric question.
Cool. Do you often use Blinkscript together with
all the time?
Yeah.
Sorry, I've interrupted you there.
No.
Yeah, I use default like native nodes and Nuke nodes all the time because sometimes even if you can do something in a Blink way, sometimes the Nuke native stuff is just better optimized and stuff like that. So there's a lot of, like for example, if an input needed to be blurred beforehand, I would much rather just use the pre-packaged super fast Gaussian blur that Nuke has instead of building one from scratch, because the blur that we build in the BuildABlow workshop chapter is super cool, and as a learning exercise, it's excellent. But I think speed-wise, I don't think it competes with the normal blur node.
All right. Ravindra's asking about Blinkscript sources.
If that's referring to resources, I think either grab a copy of the guide or check out the Foundry stuff as well, which would be cool.
Cool.
I like Dominique's question about GPU memory management and stuff.
Yeah.
So this is where I think some of the greatness of Blinkscript comes in, is that in order to create functional tools that are allow you to creatively solve problems, I'd say you actually don't really need to worry about stuff like that. And I think maybe people who are more technical than I do start to delve into that world. But for myself, who puts together a lot of tools that function perfectly, and I've made movies with them and it's all worked, I haven't had to worry about that too much in what I'm doing. Sometimes it crashes, and that's my lesson learned, I guess. But no, I'd say you didn't. And that's part of the whole ethos of the guide. The reason I called it an artist guide to Blinkscript is because I think a lot of more technical people can produce really, really insane stuff. And if you just type Blinkscript tool into the internet, you see some of the crazy stuff. But I think as an artist who is creative, I don't think you need all of that technical backing in order to get into it, because it's such a powerful resource that I think having that as a barrier to entry it would be really sad.
All right. I am not sure of the answer to this one for either presenter. Can Blinkscript do UI display? Say, for instance, you make a Blinkscript node that draws a radial with fall off. Can Blinkscript do a UI that shows the radius and fall off distance on top of the image generated?
That's a really cool question, actually. I'd say you could, in theory, make one yourself and do that. A buddy of mine made like a histogram type thing in Blinkscript that would take all of your color values and map them on a sort of color display. But I mean, I would say it's not it wouldn't be like an interactable UI that you'd maybe like PyQt, for example. It'd be much more of just like if you wrote a script that would produce that as an output, in theory you could. So if you wanted to show the radial on the screen, you could write in the corner of your image that as an overlay, or you could have two Blinkscripts running concurrently that take matching inputs, and you could show those two separately. My Chrome app tool, for example, will create, has the option to, on one Blinkscript, create an aberrated image, and in the other output, it's creating the alpha channel for each of your channels individually. So maybe that.
All right, we've got another, this is a fun one. You had any fun, unintentional, but interesting results when experimenting with Blinkscript?
I mean, all the time, But man, I'm trying to think of some good examples. A lot of it is when I made the radial blur recently, it's just stuff like, not radial blur, the surface blur recently. When I do the breakdown about that, you can see the the math I'm using to take your normals from a sphere and turn that into like 2D translation data. And, you know, it was like while I was putting it together, I'd accidentally put a minus somewhere where it should have been a plus, or a divide, a multiply. And you get all sorts of crazy stuff. Like when I was doing a contour blur, which is a blur that will like blur relative to the contours of a surface, I accidentally plugged my green and blue in the wrong way, or red and green in the wrong way. And all of a sudden I have these crazy like banding blurs that show the inverse effect of that. But I suppose there are all some really cool unintentional features like the blink buffer exploit that got talked about earlier.
Cool. We have one regarding Blinkscript and the render farm from Simon. Yeah.
Let me think. Is there a Blinkscript always render farm? Is Blinkscript always render farm friendly? For the most part, I would say yes. I think sometimes it's very much not though. But that's not necessarily due to Blinkscript as a whole. It's down to just how GPUs operate. Like for example, if you make a blurring tool and it gets quite heavy, your local GPU will run it super fast. But when you send it to the farm, if those are like headless nodes on the farm, it could begin to churn, in which case you may have to render it locally. And I guess the answer is that if you've got a farm with GPU capability, I guess that would solve that. But yeah, I think that's probably how I feel about that.
Nice. Looks like one of the last questions we have at the moment. Ever had the issue on your GPU that it wouldn't be taken as the proper GPU in a sense? Mads once wrote me that there is apparently an issue with the GPU render.
I personally haven't run into that issue, but I have an NVIDIA GPU, so I know they're always a bit better supported. And yeah, for me personally, that's not something I've run into, and I think that's where the TD knowledge starts to overtake me a little bit. So no.
Cool. I've got a little question I'm going to shoot in here. Would you mind clarifying the difference between Blinkscript and the Python API, and which situations would you use?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good. That's a really good question. So Python is really great for I'd say it's really great for interacting with Nuke. So if you wanted to make 100 nodes, or if you wanted to change loads of labels, or if you wanted to do a bunch of pipeline stuff, I think that's where Python kind of exceeds. And where Python falls down and Blinkscript starts to really excel is where you start to actually generate images on the screen. And I think that is that's what Blinkscript is for. Blinkscript is, I'd say, exclusively for pixel management, effectively, where you're taking inputs and you're manipulating them to make an output, or you're creating outputs from scratch and stuff like that.
Cool, thank you. If anybody has any other questions,
I think Hendrik's point is really great about people sort of writing and discussing about Blinkscript stuff more. Just in general, I am a massive advocate for that. Part of the reason that I'm sort of trying to talk about Blinkscript more is because I think it's a super great resource. Blinkscript is the Python for images. So that is a cool way of thinking about it. I'm sure there are some software people that are going to disagree with that, but I like that assessment. Part of the reason why I'm fairly frequently like producing a tool with all of the code commented for people to look at is to generate a discussion about it, because I think it's like one of the most powerful tools that we have available, and I think it's not getting enough love as it deserves. And I think from a poorly selfish perspective as well, I think if everybody starts to take an interest in Blinkscript, I'm sure that we'll get loads of great new features added as well that would come and sort of revolutionize image making even further, which I think would be super cool. I'm going to see if I've got anything written here that I really wanted to say. Let me think. No, that's cool. Thank you, Chris.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, that's super nice. Thank you.
Getting lots of love in the chat. It's good.
Yeah. I'm no good at taking compliments, so I'm going to pretend you didn't say that. What else? Just sort of quickly chat about the guide while I've still got everyone here and everyone's been kind enough to present the time. I'd say the style of the guide and the way I kind of try to taken when I went into it was that before the role I have now, I spent 6 or 7 months as a lead, and what we did pretty much every week was we'd have like a show and tell session where one of the amazing members of the team would spend 15 minutes just running through something cool they'd done recently and just talking about it and walking through. And I think that was a really, really effective way of sharing the knowledge. And it's the kind of thing where it's like, if you had 10 people listening in and you showed a workflow that took a 15-minute task down to a 5-minute task, you're saving 100 minutes per use of that tool per artist or whatever. And so that's what I try to emulate with this, is that each one of them is, for the most part, 25 minutes or like averaging maybe like 15 minutes, where people can have that same thing where it's like, it's a live demo. And the way I kind of recommend taking in the guide as well, and I do talk about this in the introduction, is to watch through a video once and like see where you start from and where you end from, because Blinkscript for less technical people can be incredibly abstract. And then watch through it again, and this time follow along and say, hey, I know where my destination is now, so I can walk along that way. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm sold.
Nice. Have I run into situations where comp with heavy Blinkscript run more slowly on the farm? Yeah, I definitely have. Thank you for doing that. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, I absolutely have found that. I think there are a lot of tools that do rely very heavily on the GPU, and just due to the nature of how computers work, I think you do just have to pre-comp them. I recently did run into the same thing, and so I think there are definitely hardware limitations that do get in the way of creative solutions to things, but yeah, I definitely agree with that.
All right, I think that's probably all we have time for, unless anyone has any burning questions.
Speak now or forever hold your peace. Yeah, I mean, I guess as a quick sign off, I'd just say, again, I genuinely really appreciate everyone coming out. I know everyone's time is super precious, so having an hour of it, especially with so many people that turned up, which is just amazing. Yeah, if you're interested in learning about it and you want a load of free resources, go to the blog section of my website, as I've got quite a few tools on there now, a lot of which are now focusing on Blinkscript that you can break apart, and I talk through the logic, and you can maybe reverse engineer the code. And then, yeah, if you do want to learn from scratch over the course of if 1 hour of hearing my voice wasn't enough, you can have 4 hours of hearing my voice. If you do grab a copy of the guide, I hope people take an interest, because I think it's super useful. And yeah, genuinely, thank you so much for coming along. It's been super cool.
Yes. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for your time, and thank you, Chris. It's been an amazing session. I think I've learned a few things. I hope everyone else has too. And see you next time.
Amazing. Thanks, everyone. Happy comping. Bye.
Bye.